When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I didn't expect that smile. Not then, not in that moment. But when she said it, when the words fell from her lips, I felt a strange calm wash over me. As if all those years of raising children, of giving my heart to a family that was supposed to be mine, were finally coming to an end. It wasn't a relief exactly. It was more like an acceptance, like I'd known this day would come all along. I suppose that's the trick of time, isn't it? It bends and shifts, and before you know it, you're no longer the person you were, no longer the woman who once cradled your children, watched them grow and held their hands as they ventured out into the world. And when you become the old woman in the corner, the one who's seen it all, you start to understand, you start to feel it in your bones, the inevitable, the moment when you become a burden instead of a blessing. But I wasn't always this old. There was a time when I was full of life and laughter, when I could hold my head high. There was a time when I was the one my children leaned on. And yet, now, I was here, sitting across from her, my daughter-in-law, her eyes full of frustration, her voice sharp as a knife. "Mom, you need to leave. It's not working anymore." I remember her words clearly. My heart didn't race. It didn't shatter. It just stopped. I looked into her eyes, waiting for some sort of apology, some glimmer of regret, but there was nothing. She was firm in her decision, and I knew she wouldn't change her mind. So I smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy or happiness. It wasn't even a smile of understanding. It was a smile of quiet surrender, the kind of smile a person gives when they know they've reached the end of something important, something that will never return to the way it once was. The setup. I have spent my life loving this family. For as long as I can remember, I've been a mother, a wife, a sister, an aunt. I've played all the roles that keep a family together. I've been there for every birthday, every holiday, every milestone. I've mended broken hearts, soothed troubled minds, and offered advice even when it wasn't wanted. I've always been the one to help, the one to support, the one to hold everything together. But what happens when you're no longer needed? What happens when your love, your presence, your help is no longer seen as a gift, but as a weight? That's what I was facing now. A moment I couldn't deny, a truth I had to face. My daughter-in-law, Claire, had always been the type of person to keep things bottled up. From the moment she entered our family, there was a wall between us. She never made much of an effort to get to know me, to understand who I was. And maybe that was where everything started. Maybe I should have pushed harder, tried to break down that wall sooner. But instead, I let it be. I let her be herself. After all, I wasn't her mother. I was just the grandmother. And there was a time, a long time ago, when I thought everything was fine. I thought I was doing my part, supporting my son and his family, and loving them the way a mother should. But over the years, things started to change. It was small at first, just little things I noticed. The way Claire would give me a polite smile but never really talk to me, the way she'd avoid eye contact when I'd ask how things were going. And my son, Michael, seemed to drift further away too. It wasn't like we had arguments or fights. No, it was more subtle, more painful in its silence. The house wasn't the same anymore. The laughter had faded, the conversations had grown shorter, the silences longer, and somewhere in the midst of it all I started to feel invisible, a stranger in my own family. But I kept pushing through, believing that one day things would get better. I kept telling myself that love would fix it all. After all, love is supposed to heal, isn't it? But then came that day, that fateful day when everything came to a head. The rising conflict. It had been a long week. Michael had been working late, as usual. Claire had been quieter than normal, and the house felt colder somehow. I noticed it every time I walked through the rooms. The stillness, the tension in the air. But I didn't say anything. I didn't want to cause trouble. I just kept to myself, waiting for things to return to normal. But one evening, it all changed. I was sitting in the living room, waiting for Michael to come home from work, when Claire came into the room. She didn't sit beside me like she usually did when she needed advice. She didn't even acknowledge my presence at first. Instead, she stood in front of me, her arms crossed, her face hardened. "I need to talk to you, Mom," she said, her voice tight. I looked up at her, surprised. "What's going on, Claire? Is everything okay?" She took a deep breath as if she were bracing herself for something. "I don't know how to say this," she began, her eyes darting away from mine. "But I think it's time for you to leave." I stared at her, trying to process the words she had just spoken. It felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. All the years of loving her, of helping her, of watching her become a mother, seemed to vanish in an instant. "Leave," I repeated, my voice trembling. "Why? What have I done?" "You haven't done anything," she replied quickly. "It's just things aren't working anymore. You're always here, always hovering. It's too much. Michael and I need space, Mum." I was speechless. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, clouding my thoughts. My mind raced, trying to find something, anything to say. But all I could do was look at her, look at the woman I had helped raise, the woman I had loved and cared for. And in that moment, I saw it all. The years of unspoken resentment, the unacknowledged distance, the quiet frustration that had been building between us for so long. I could feel my heart breaking, but I didn't show it. Instead, I just nodded. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to cause any more pain. I had always tried to keep peace in my family, even when it felt like I was the only one trying. But now, I was faced with the undeniable truth that I wasn't wanted anymore. The turning point. It wasn't until the next morning that the full weight of what had happened sank in. Michael came home from work to find me sitting quietly at the kitchen table. He looked at me, confusion written all over his face. "Mom, what's going on? Claire told me what happened." I looked up at him. My son, the one I had raised with so much love, the one who had once been so close to me. Now, there was only distance between us. "I don't know, Michael," I said, my voice soft. "I just don't know anymore." He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. And then, as if something inside him broke, he sat down beside me. I could feel the heaviness in his presence, the guilt, the sadness. I knew he didn't want this. He didn't want to choose between me and his wife. But that's what he was doing. "I don't know what to do, Mom," he said quietly. "I love both of you, but Claire, she's been asking me to choose." I looked at him, feeling my heart ache for him. He was stuck, torn between two women he loved, and I couldn't blame him. I knew that if I had to choose, I would have chosen him too. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. It hurt in ways I couldn't even begin to explain. "You don't have to choose," I whispered. "I'm not asking you to choose, Michael. But if you think it's best for me to leave, then I will. I'll go." His eyes filled with tears. "Mum, no, I don't want you to leave." But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The walls had been built, and no amount of love could tear them down now. The days that followed were a blur of silence and strained conversations. I moved into a small room at the back of their house, just down the hall from Michael and Claire's bedroom. It wasn't the same as the home I had once known, the place where I had cooked meals for my children, where I had held them close in times of need. Now, I was just there, a presence that no longer felt welcome. Michael came by to check on me from time to time, but even his visits grew shorter, his eyes more distant. There was an uncomfortable air between us, as if we were both pretending everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. I wanted to speak up, to ask him to tell me the truth, but I held back. I didn't want to make him feel worse. He was already carrying so much weight on his shoulders. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky and the room grew dim, I sat in the chair by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The rain had started to fall, soft at first, then steady. I could hear the faint sound of droplets hitting the roof, the rhythm calming my racing thoughts. It was the kind of rain that always made me think of old memories, days spent in the kitchen with my children, their laughter filling the air, the smell of freshly baked bread. But now, as I stared out at the rain, I felt a deep sadness settle in my chest. The memories were slipping away, fading into something distant, something I could never quite touch again. I heard footsteps approaching my door. The soft knock broke the stillness, and I stood up to open it. It was Claire. Her face was tired, her eyes heavy with something I couldn't quite place. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and there was a fragility to her presence that made my heart ache. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. She hesitated for a moment, then walked in slowly, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. I could tell she was holding something back, something she wanted to say but couldn't bring herself to. I sat down in the chair across from her, my hands folded in my lap. The silence between us stretched for what felt like an eternity before she spoke again. "I didn't mean what I said the other day," Claire confessed, her voice trembling. "I was angry. I didn't know what I was doing." I was surprised by her words. It wasn't like Claire to admit when she was wrong. She had always been so proud, so unwilling to show vulnerability. But now, sitting in front of me, I could see the cracks in her armour. "You don't have to explain," I said softly, trying to ease her burden. "I understand." She shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "No, you don't. You don't understand how hard it's been for me. I've been trying so hard to make this family work, to keep everything together. But I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know how to fix it." My heart softened at her words. I could see the struggle in her eyes, the weight of being a wife, a mother, trying to keep everything balanced while she felt like she was losing control. "I've been so focused on what I need," she continued, her voice breaking. "I never stopped to think about what you needed, what you've been through. I never asked you how you felt." I watched her, feeling the walls between us begin to crumble. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the regret that had been building inside her. And for the first time in a long time, I saw the young woman I had once embraced into our family. She wasn't just Michael's wife anymore. She was Claire, a person, just like me, struggling to find her way. "I've always wanted to help," I said quietly. "But I can't help if I don't know what's wrong." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "I know, and I'm sorry. I've been too proud to admit that I need help." For a moment, we both sat in silence, the rain falling outside. The room felt warmer now, as if the air itself had shifted. It was a small moment, but it meant more than I could put into words. A growing distance, the conversation between Claire and me didn't solve everything. Nothing ever does. But it was a step, a small one. And sometimes that's all you need to begin healing. Yet, even as we talked, I could feel the distance between Michael and me growing wider. He tried his best to be supportive, but I could see the toll it was taking on him, the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided looking at me too long, as if afraid that doing so would break something inside him. I remember one evening, after dinner, when Michael and I were alone in the kitchen. He was washing the dishes, and I was sitting at the table, watching him. The silence between us was thick, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, I broke it. Michael, I said, my voice soft but firm, you don't have to do this alone. He paused, his hand stilling in the soapy water. What do you mean? I mean, you don't have to carry all this weight. You don't have to choose. I'm not asking you to choose between me and Claire. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. It's not that simple, Mum. I know it's not, I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. But I've raised you to be strong, Michael, and part of being strong is knowing when to let go. I'm not your responsibility anymore. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with so many emotions I couldn't name, and then, for the first time in a long while, he nodded. I know. I don't want to lose you, he said quietly. The words hung in the air, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. But then, like it always does, time moved on. The dishes were done, the kitchen grew quiet again, and the weight of the conversation lingered in the background. Days passed. The rain had stopped, and the sun came back, but the storm inside me, inside this family, had only grown stronger. There were moments when things seemed to settle, when Claire and I would share a quiet cup of tea, and the weight between us would lift just a little. But those moments were fleeting, like waves crashing against the shore, always retreating, never staying. The strain was wearing on all of us, though I don't think any of us knew how to stop it. Michael still tried to hold everything together, but I could see the cracks in his smile, the worry lines that deepened around his eyes. He would spend more and more time at work, and when he did come home, he seemed to carry a heavy burden with him. I, too, felt the distance growing between me and him, between me and Claire. But there was something else in the air now, something that neither of them wanted to admit. The quiet tension that had been simmering for months was finally boiling over. We could all feel it. The impending collapse of everything we had worked so hard to hold together. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, just a few days after that conversation between Claire and me. Michael had taken the kids to the park, leaving Claire and me alone in the house. It was an unusually quiet day, the kind of day where you could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through an old family photo album, when Claire walked in, her expression unreadable. I looked up, a faint smile tugging at my lips. You know, I was just looking at pictures of you when you were little. You were such a little troublemaker. She didn't return my smile. Instead, she leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms over her chest. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice steady but distant, about everything. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the kind of tone she usually used with me. There was something final in her words, something that made my stomach tighten in a way I didn't like. I nodded, setting the photo album aside, my attention fully on her now. Okay, Claire, what's on your mind? She hesitated, glancing away for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. Then she took a deep breath and stepped forward, closing the distance between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, but there was a firmness in it that made me pause. I've been thinking a lot about us, about this whole situation, and I've realized something. I waited, my chest tightening with every passing second. I wasn't sure what was coming, but I felt the shift in the air, the weight of something heavy about to fall. I think it's time for you to go, she said, her words clear and final. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words didn't quite make sense, not in the way they should have, not after everything we had been through, not after the small steps of reconciliation. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw it. She wasn't asking, she wasn't pleading, she wasn't even angry, she was just done. The room felt colder suddenly, and the quiet was deafening. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, the echo of her words ringing in my ears. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. What could I say? How could I respond to something like this? All I wanted was to be understood, to be loved, to be seen. But in this moment, I realized that none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that this was it, the end. I don't want to do this, Mum, Claire continued, her voice now breaking. But I don't know what else to do. Michael and I, we need our space. We need to figure things out. And I think this is the only way. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the woman who had been my daughter-in-law, the one I had welcomed into my family with open arms. She wasn't just a person I had to care for. She was a woman, struggling in her own way. She wasn't perfect, neither was I, but we both had our battles. But I also knew something then, deep down. Claire was making a choice, and I couldn't make it for her. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking just a little as I wiped a tear from my cheek. I understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. If that's what you think is best, then I'll go. I'll pack my things. I turned away from her, not because I was angry, but because I couldn't let her see how much her words had hurt me, how much they had broken a part of me that I didn't know was still there. As I walked down the hall to gather my things, I could hear Claire crying softly behind me, and for the first time in so long, I felt like I was losing her all over again. But I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo what had been said, what had been done. The emotional break that night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The house felt empty, without the noise of the children, without Michael coming home and telling me about his day. All I could hear was the silence, the same silence that had been growing between us for months. I packed my things quietly, taking only what I needed: clothes, a few personal items, a photo album. It felt like I was packing away my entire life, piece by piece. I couldn't help but feel a deep sadness in my chest. I had given so much to this family. Too much, perhaps. But I had done it because I loved them. I still loved them. When I was finished, I sat down on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. I didn't want to leave, but I had no other choice. They didn't need me anymore, not in the way I needed them. And maybe that was the hardest part, the realization that you're not needed anymore, that the love you've given, the sacrifices you've made, have been forgotten. I stood up, looking one last time around the room, as if memorizing every corner, every piece of furniture that had once been a part of my life. I didn't say goodbye. There was no need. Goodbye had already been said in the quiet, unspoken moments that had built up over the years. As I reached for the door, I heard Michael's voice from the hallway. "Mum?" I turned, startled. There he was, standing at the end of the hallway, his face pale, his eyes filled with regret. "I don't want you to go," he said, his voice breaking. I felt my heart break all over again, but I knew what I had to do. I had to leave. "I'm sorry, Michael," I said quietly, tears welling in my eyes. I wish things were different, but sometimes we have to let go. I didn't look back as I walked out the door. Maybe part of me knew that if I did, I wouldn't have the strength to leave. But the other part of me, the one that had been broken down over the years, the one that had endured silent heartbreak after silent heartbreak, knew it was time. I had given them everything I had, and now it was time to step away. The days after I left were quiet. I moved into a small apartment, far enough from Michael and Claire's house that I wouldn't be tempted to call or stop by. I didn't want to be a constant reminder of what had been lost. I wanted to find some peace for them and for myself. I spent the first few days alone in the apartment, sorting through the few belongings I had brought with me. It wasn't much, just the bare essentials: a bed, a table, A few chairs. The apartment was small, but it was mine. It felt strange, though, like I had been stripped of everything that once made me feel whole. It was hard not to think of them, not to remember the years spent in their house, watching my grandchildren grow, seeing my son and daughter-in-law struggle in their own ways. The silence in the apartment was deafening. It felt like the silence I had felt between us, between me and Claire, between me and Michael. But this silence was different. It wasn't full of resentment or regret. It was the kind of silence that comes when you've said everything that needs to be said, when you've let go of everything that holds you back. I knew, in time, the silence would fade. But for now, it was a quiet I needed, a quiet where I could reflect, where I could heal. The call. It was a week before I heard from Michael again. It wasn't a phone call I expected. I had thought, perhaps, that he would wait longer, that he would give me space, as he had always done before. But when the phone rang that morning, I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling slightly as I brought it to my ear. "Mom?" Michael's voice cracked through the line, heavy with emotion. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to say." I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath. It was the moment I had been dreading and yet hoping for all at once. I had always known that, eventually, Michael would come to me, but now that the moment was here, I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. "Michael," I said gently, my voice calm, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "You don't have to say anything. You've said it all already." He was silent for a long time, and I could hear the crackling of his breath on the other end. "I've made so many mistakes, Mom," he said finally. "I took you for granted, and I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." My heart ached at his words. It was hard to hear, but it was the truth. And deep down, I knew it was a truth that he had to come to on his own, just as I had come to it. "Michael," I whispered, "you don't need to apologize. I'm not angry. I'm just sorry we couldn't find our way sooner. But this was always going to happen, wasn't it?" There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Maybe, but I still wish I had done things differently. I should have fought for you. I should have fought for us." I didn't respond immediately. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words seemed too heavy to lift. After a few moments, I finally spoke. "You don't have to fight anymore, Michael. Sometimes letting go is the best way to love someone. And I think we both needed this space to understand what it is we really want, what we need." He sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. "I've missed you so much, Mom. I don't know how to fix this." I closed my eyes again, letting the words sink in. I wanted to tell him that everything would be okay, but the truth was, I didn't know if it would be. The only thing I knew for sure was that we were both learning, slowly, how to find our way back. "We'll figure it out," I said softly. "In time, we'll figure it out." A new beginning. The weeks that followed were filled with small, quiet steps. Michael came to visit me at my apartment a few times, and we talked, really talked, in ways we hadn't in years. We didn't solve everything, but we didn't have to. There was something healing about just being in the same room, sharing the space that had once been ours. Claire, too, reached out. At first, it was a hesitant message, asking if I was doing okay, if I needed anything. It wasn't much, but it was a start. We hadn't yet spoken face to face, but I could sense a shift in her, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, we both had a lot to learn. It wasn't easy, it was messy, and it was slow, but it was something. One day, about a month after I left, I received a letter from Claire. It wasn't long, just a few short paragraphs, but the words it carried were enough to begin mending the broken parts of my heart. She apologized for everything, for her pride, for the way she had pushed me away, for the way she had let things get so far out of hand. And she told me she missed me, that she wanted to try again. Not just for Michael, not just for the kids, but for us. I kept the letter in a drawer where I could pull it out whenever I needed a reminder. A reminder that even when things seem broken beyond repair, there is always a way forward, even if it takes time, even if it takes patience. The lesson, I realized something during that time, something that had been hard to accept. It's not always about being there for others, it's about knowing when to step back and let them grow. Sometimes, in loving others too much, we forget to love ourselves, and sometimes letting go is the only way to truly love. I don't have all the answers. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know this. Love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about setting someone free, even when it hurts. And sometimes, when you do, you'll find your way back to each other. I don't regret what I did. I don't regret leaving, because in the end, it was the only way I could truly teach them and myself the power of love, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of letting go. And so, I carry on, with hope, with faith, and with the quiet understanding that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the greatest healing. The days have grown softer since then. It's strange how time works, how the sharp edges of pain eventually dull, and you're left with a quieter kind of peace. I don't know if I'll ever stop missing them, but I've learned to live with that ache. It's a part of me now, just like everything else that's come before. Michael and Claire came over one evening, both of them a little hesitant but willing. The kids were with a sitter, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like we were just a family again, sitting together. No expectations, no demands. We didn't talk about the past much that evening. There was no need to. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. We laughed. We shared stories. Michael told me about his work. Claire talked about her new hobbies. And for a moment, it felt like nothing had ever changed. It felt like the family I had once known was still here, still mine. But I knew it wasn't the same. It didn't have to be the same. What mattered now was that we were together in a new way. A way that allowed us to be ourselves without the weight of old resentments, old expectations. We were learning to love each other as we were now, not as we had been in the past. At the end of the evening, when they were getting ready to leave, Michael gave me a long hug. It wasn't a quick, obligatory hug. It was the kind of hug that said, "I'm here, I'm with you." It was the kind of hug that made everything feel like it was going to be okay. "I'm proud of you, Mum," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've learned so much from you." I held him a little longer than usual, feeling the weight of his words settle into my heart. There was no need for anything more. The healing had already begun. Claire, too, gave me a hug, though hers was quieter, gentler. She didn't say much, but the softness in her embrace spoke volumes. We didn't need words anymore. Sometimes the quietest gestures are the ones that matter the most. They left that night, leaving me with a sense of calm, a feeling of closure I hadn't known I needed. The house was still empty, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. I knew that in time we would all find our way back to each other, one step at a time. A reflection. It's funny, isn't it, how life goes? We spend so much time trying to hold on to the past, to the way things used to be, that we forget the future is always waiting for us. And sometimes the only way forward is to let go. I never imagined that letting go would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. But now, looking back, I realise it was the only thing that could have saved us. Holding on so tightly to what was only created more pain, more distance. But stepping back, giving space, letting my family breathe, that's when healing started to happen. When I let go of the weight of my expectations, I gave them the room to grow, to change, and to find their way back to me. I've learned so much from all of this, not just about family, but about myself. It's easy to think that love means being there all the time, always holding on, never letting go. But sometimes love is about letting people go, giving them the space to figure things out on their own. Love isn't about control, it's about trust. Trust that, no matter what happens, love will always find a way to bring you back together. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. Love isn't something you can force. It's something you nurture, something you protect, and when the time is right, something you let go of, knowing that in the end it will return. I don't know what the future holds for me, for Michael, for Claire, or for our family, but I know this: the most important thing is that we're still trying, and that's enough. We're all still learning, still growing, still loving, even if it's not in the way we expected. The moral, in the end, all I want to say is this: sometimes the hardest decisions we make are the ones that teach us the most. Sometimes stepping away from something or someone you love is the only way to let it heal. It doesn't mean you've given up. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you love them enough to give them the space they need to grow. And when you're faced with moments of loss or confusion, remember this: healing isn't linear. It doesn't always happen the way we expect, and it's not always easy. But as long as you're willing to face the truth, even when it hurts, you'll find your way through it. And eventually, you'll find your way back to the people you love. Because love doesn't end, not really. It changes, it evolves, but it never truly leaves, ending a quiet hope. So I'll carry on. I'll keep living, keep learning, keep loving. In my own way. Maybe things will be different from now on. Maybe they won't. But one thing I know for sure: I've learned to embrace the quiet moments, to listen to the silence and find peace in it. And as for my family, I trust that we'll be okay. We've been through too much not to be. I don't need to know what tomorrow will bring. I just need to know that in the end, we'll always find our way back to each other. Because that's what family does. And in the quiet of the night, when the world is still and the weight of the day fades away, I find hope in that. End of part 5. Yes. Conclusion: the story now comes to a soft, reflective close. The characters, especially the narrator, have grown through their emotional journey. There's a sense of peace, healing, and understanding that makes the ending feel hopeful and warm, as if the family is on the brink of something new, even after the struggles they faced. This is the final part of the narration. I hope it resonates with you. Feel free to reach out if you want any further changes or adjustments to the story. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving behind the family I had once loved with all my heart.